Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Is the mic on? Hi. Wow, such a nice audience, all of you here. So great. So my name's Helen Molesworth. I'm the chief curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. And it's our pleasure to have you all here with us today. I'm going to do a little housekeeping, which is, because I'm a feminist, actually a source of pleasure. I'm going to thank the people who made today possible. Primarily the people who helped us put on Matthew Barney's rather extraordinary River of Fundament exhibition across the aisle at the Geffen. So I want to thank the Lorenz Foundation, particularly Maya Uri, Steve and Alexandra Cohen Foundation, the Barbara Gladstone Gallery, the Sadie Coles Gallery, Mark Fletcher and Tobias Meyer, the Glenstone Foundation, Regan Projects, Cindy and Howard Rachofsky, and Richard and Pamela Kramlich. Without your support, none of this would have been able to happen, so thank you so much. I also want to thank, for the specificity of where we are right now, our colleagues at the Japanese American National Museum for giving us this auditorium. I'd like to thank Lanka Tattersall, who's an assistant curator at MOCA, and Rebecca Madelon, the curatorial assistant, who worked on Matthew's show and basically minded all the details. And I'd like to thank Anna Katz for making all the arrangements for us to be here today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce all of the speakers, or dialogists maybe would be a better word. And then I'm going to take the convener's privilege of asking a question, and we're going to start talking, and then when it feels right, we'll open it up to questions. And since it's a Matthew Barney event, you know, that could be in, 5 hours, 40 minutes, something like that. So just, you guys settle in. This is what we're doing. All right. I'm just joking. How many of you have been able to see the show at the Geffen across the way? We got some hands up. Good. All right, that's great. Okay, so we have with us Matthew Barney, Bill Forsythe, and Maggie Nelson. Matthew Barney was born in 1967 in San Francisco. In 1989, he graduated from Yale University. Since then, he has created work that fuses sculpture, performance, and video. His work has been included in such important exhibitions as Documenta 9 in Kassel. He's been included in the 93 and 95 Whitney Biennials, the 93 and 2003 Venice Biennials, the Cremaster Cycle, an exhibition of work from his first epic film cycle, was organized by the Guggenheim Museum and traveled to the Ludwig Museum in Cologne and the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris in France. His drawing restraint was a full-scale survey of his ongoing performance-based project and has been organized by the 21st Century Museum of Contemporary Art in Kanazawa in Japan, and traveled to Korea and San Francisco, the Serpentine, and the Kunsthalle in Vienna. His last 7 years of work and a project that really we can only describe as epic, The River of Fundament, is currently on view at the Geffen, which is an operatic film made with Jonathan Bepler that you can see on Thursdays and Saturdays and Sundays in the theater that we actually built especially for this purpose of being able to show the film in the same space-time continuum as the sculptures. And then this extraordinary body of sculptures and drawings and a performance element are on view at the Geffen. Bill Forsythe is recognized as one of the world's foremost choreographers, celebrated for reorienting the practice of ballet from its identification with the classical repertoire to a dynamic 21st century art form. He was recently appointed associate choreographer with the Paris Opera Ballet, and this fall he joined USC's Gloria Kaufman School of Dance as professor of dance. Bill began his career as a dancer with the Joffrey Ballet and went on to become the director of the Ballet Frankfurt from 1984 to 2004, where he did really some of the most extraordinary work. In 2005, he formed the Forsythe Company, an independent ensemble that maintains an extensive international touring schedule. And for those of you who have never seen a Bill Forsythe dance, the next time you see one come up, just go. Just don't even question. Just cancel whatever appointment you have and go and see it. And finally, Maggie Nelson. Maggie has a PhD in English literature from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York and is the author of 5 books of nonfiction and 4 books of poetry. Her most recent book is The Argonauts, a work of auto theory about gender, sexuality, sodomitical maternity, queer family, and the limitations and possibilities of language. It's also a cult book. I really, at this juncture, don't know anyone who has not read The Argonauts or doesn't have The Argonauts at the top of their pile of books to be read. I even know someone who named their new puppy Argo. You know you've made it big when people are naming their dogs after your book. Her 2001 book of art and cultural criticism, The Art of Cruelty, A Reckoning, was featured on the front cover of the Sunday Book Review of the New York Times as well, and was also named a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. She is currently faculty in the Critical Studies Department at Cal Arts. So it's a fancy panel. All right, so I have the enviable and daunting task. One of the things that strikes me about the 3 of you as practitioners in your various fields is all of you have been involved in some way with transgressing the boundaries of your given medium. None of you have been particularly obedient within the terms that your medium's history has offered you, be it sculpture, dance, or fiction or criticism. But that doesn't seem enough, really, to unite what I think is the core thing that you might share. And that is that I think all 3 of you are deep sensualists. In all of your work, there is a kind of what I would call an ornateness or a baroqueness, a sense of excess, either in form, language, or affect. And that excess or that baroqueness, that ornateness, comes about in a few ways. You transgress the boundaries of your medium of choice, but you also, for all of you, your body, the human body, a body is at stake. It is a central problem in all of your work. You do extreme things to your own bodies, and you also do extreme things to the bodies of others. And this is what I mean when I refer to all of you as sensualists. So I wanted to open the floor, if we might, by talking a little bit, if each of you could talk a little bit about how this aspect of your work works in your work, and particularly if you might talk about strategies of either withholding and release as strategies in the work, or restraint and abandon. So this way in which there is a kind of hooking on and unhooking, restraint and abandon, release and withholding that happens in all of the work. And I'll turn it over to you first, Matthew, since we're really here to talk sort of in and around your work today.
Well, for sure, I'm interested in rules and structure. So, for me, the starting point is often some kind of frame, and for example, River of Fundament was a novel. To take a novel that I didn't have much of a relationship to really, and to use it structurally at first, just try to find something within the text that could give the piece of shape, and I think it's true that it becomes quite sensual pretty quickly, because I think the form, the novel in this case, is sort of visualized as a body, through which my language can pass, and so there is a kind of an intimacy with that form. Although it feels abstract, it's still intimate, and it's in this case it's in a piece of erotic fiction too. So it kind of raised the bar in that way. Restraint for sure. The like once the frame is established, I think part of the rule making has to do with finding some thresholds that, in this case, I think pornography in a way was a threshold that had to be dealt with this mailer text, because it has such a kind of frontality to its descriptions of sexual acts or sexual images, and in a way that I'm not really, it's not my brand of eroticism. And so that kind of became a barrier or a threshold for me, I think. And I think when we were talking the other day, we talked about this idea of pairing images, strong images against one another, like an image of defecation next to an image of the Empire State Building turning off, and how the limiting factor is actually the Empire State Building. Like in a way, it's a more pornographic image, and I think that once that frame is established and some rules are in place, that's when the kind of alchemy can begin. So that's kind of an alchemical process for me of juxtaposing images and, pairing erotic images next to architectural images or whatever it might be. Is that enough?
That was a lot. Do you want to talk a little bit about withholding?
Well, I've always thought that when I've been asked to think of these video works as films, that for me they always fall short of traditional film, in the sense that there's a kind of lack of character development, for example, and it's, I think, intentional, although it might be an intuitively driven intention to hold back on a kind of more determined form of storytelling, so that a kind of sculptural presence could remain in the film, and so sculptural form could be pulled from the film. So I think that there's a lot of withholding in the film and the editing, the filmmaking part of it, where like I can recognize that for sure a scene could be developed further and could become more standalone as a scene, but it wouldn't function in the way I need it to function sculpturally. So there's a lot of holding back in that way.
doing there?
Hello?
I'll have to project a little. Okay. What was the question? Rules. No. Which part of that question? No, rules.
I would love for you to talk about strategies of release and withholding, or restraint and abandon.
I'd like to address the rule one first. At the
Go
beginning,
for it.
Yeah, at the beginning of my career, a person, an elder choreographer, came to me and actually whispered into my ear, rather conspiratorially, "There are no rules," by which I think he meant that there are only rules. He didn't mean there is a rule, or is what he meant. There is no one rule. So I guess the majority of the practice has been to find out what kinds of action make rules, and if those rules, or what makes a rule valuable, useful, something you need. And over time, I guess there's been an acquisition of useful rules and rules that are exceptions. So there's anomalies, there's those exceptions, and there's the ones that seem to sit. And we're talking about improv tech. Some things just work better, last longer than others. But finally, everything is at the service of, in my case, my medium, which is usually dancers. So I'm trying to make sense of the bodies in front of me. I really am. That's my job. That's my obligation. So I am in a dialogue with them as knowledgeable bodies, I guess, and trying to figure out how I could enable them to access what they know best under other circumstances, rather differently than they had assumed they would use it, what they know. So I think the most valuable contribution, for example, to ballet has been that it actually works backwards, or works best backwards, for example.
What do you mean by that?
It works best backwards. Usually think of, so if you're actually in the practice, it would be like if I had a couple gears and I went like this. But in fact, it goes like this. It goes forward and backwards at the same time. We'd assumed in a kind of rhetorical way. There's these rhetorical figures in ballet. And they are wonderful. Something like tombe parabere glissade assemblée, which goes bum bum ba da dum bum bum ba da bum, like that. And these were fixed. That was the way you did it, and you could only recombine these fixed figures. But I discovered that if you did assemblée da di ba 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 ba, but not in the sense of a kind of rote or crude reversal, but I'd have to get up and dance. Yeah.
Everybody's like, oh no.
That's what they were dreading, right? Oh no, yeah. Is that I learned this from a Serbian woman, Madame Boskovic, who had studied with this particular Russian woman named Preobrazhenska, and she taught me that it all goes backwards. So there's a kind of inverted, I'm going to say inwendig volle Figur. What is that? An inverted fullness. So it fills up by inverting on itself. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of endo-generational or something like that. Or yeah, does that make sense? Endo, like endoscope, you know? And that it makes things by collapsing in and backwards. Yeah, and that seems to be the project. That and Counterpoint. Yeah.
And what do you think about the kind of possible baroqueness of your work and Matthew's work? Can people hear me? That sort of that sense of the baroque, or the sense of the grand excess that happens in your work and also in Matthew's.
That's Counterpoint.
That's Counterpoint.
Counterpoint. I'm obsessed with it. That's all I'm interested in, actually.
Mm-hmm. And when you're using the word counterpoint,
That's why I like Maggie's work.
yeah, well,
Yeah,
Maggie's work
because
has an
it keeps
excessive
regressing. You have to go
yes.
back and read again and read again and read again and read again. At least that's my job
Right.
when I'm reading.
And is counterpoint a technical term that you're pulling out of dance and using
Out of music.
out of music and spinning it now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of visual counterpoint in Matt's work, right?
Right.
The thing comes back, it has a new context, it's been remade, you revisit it, it's been inverted, flipped, twisted, et cetera, and these kind of transformations or translations are very important, I think. This notion of what is the purpose or what value does the isometry have or identity have. Things are the same but different, yeah. So I guess it's a question of mathematical transformation more than anything else for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, you understand what I mean there? Yeah. With Maggie, too, I never know how if I'm reading and I go, oh, okay, and I think it might be going one way and then you flip, yeah, and then I have to go back and look at the statement again and now knowing what she thinks about it and reread it, and I've read the thing twice in two different ways. Yeah, and that I find contrapuntal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maggie? Maggie?
Helen. I don't think this is working. Is this working? Oh, great. Okay, fantastic. Okay, they just turned them down, I think, from before. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts. I think when we met the other day, I guess, Helen, when you were just talking about transgression of the forms, when I started talking to Matthew and Bill, it seemed to me, I don't know, I felt a kind of kindredness of spirit in that I think that sometimes I find it, I don't have like a pet peeve about the notion of transgressing, but I think people sometimes talk about transgression as if that's the goal, of the thing. And I felt immediately the kind of power of their attention onto whether it's counterpoint or a certain kind of materiality or what it does under stress or under, that it's almost like the power of that attention and following it through. I'm not often, frontally paying attention to the question of transgression, whether it be of the form, the medium, whatever. I think there's something, I guess I'm just trying to say about the power of following your interest through that can create a transgressiveness. Precisely because it's not maybe anyone else's interest, and you're willing to, and you go the wall, with it. So that's kind of the first thing that I noticed in talking to them. But then there's the question of the body, like you say, and what Matthew is talking about, or what you were talking about extremity or pornography or relationship to images side by side, and I think, or responsibility to your dancers' bodies. And I do think that since we are all working with that in some way, however formal the point of interest, the visceral, sometimes emotional, sometimes still formal, but responses that are elicited by working with bodies, be it your own or that of others, they inject all these formal concerns with the kind of content that is kind of within your control and kind of not within your control at the same time. And I think that I don't, even in talking a lot about doing, quote unquote, like writing about the body or bodily writing, I don't really ever think that that's what I'm going to go sit down and do. It's not like a goal, per se. And it's often until something is reflected back to me that the role of the body becomes more apparent. I think that's different in a way. I'm curious for these guys because they both have done work with their own bodies, and then with a lot of other people's bodies, and moving them around space and filming them, or working with them daily in different ways. And that's not something, writing is the way I wield other people's bodies. It's more literally disembodied in that they become kind of idea holders that I'm moving around the space, which is very distinct. So I think in that way I'm really fascinated by I don't know that literature can match a certain kind of Baroque excess that comes from the sense of real people put into formation or orgy or something. I don't know that, it just doesn't, there's a certain kind of, even if you read the Marquis de Sade or something, like the kind of pinnacle of a kind of chaos, it's always very impressed upon you while you're reading that this is a work of imagination. I think that's very interesting, just as a form of difference about the way that performativity in language can happen and the way that it happens in dance or in operatic or performance production.
Can we keep talking a little bit about all those other bodies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That side by side.
Wait, say it again,
The
Bill.
thing apropos Sod, what Matt was talking about, putting images together, is philosophy and pornography side by side. Also
Mhm.
the contrast in
Right.
Sod, which is, I think, gets the interesting part about it.
Yeah, like whenever I teach philosophy in the bedroom or something, there's like a long 40 or 50-page tract about, French revolutionary politics. I'm always tempted to like drop out to keep the students' interest or something, but you can't, because that's the whole point, is that it's in there and you can't get it out. But Helen, I'm sorry.
No. This is exactly. I mean, I didn't think we'd get to the French Revolution as quickly as we did. but I'm grateful. But I am sort of curious. I mean, I do think that there is a sense that we know that there are no police in your fantasy. There is no right. Like certain moral and ethical codes are suspended in the realm of fantasy. That's what's so incredibly compelling, interesting, and maybe even like deeply necessary about it. But you all, in your own ways, do really utilize the bodies of others.
Yeah, but I'm trying to do just the opposite. I'm trying to be the most ethical person I can conceivably be
That's what
vis-a-vis these other people.
That's the question I want to get to.
Yeah.
So what are that? Where does ethics lie in relationship to your relationship to other bodies? Is it the ethics of the maker in relationship to like real people who are working in the name of your overall project, or does ethics lie more in the space of fantasy? Are your fantasies populated with a certain kind of suggestions about how we might be with one another? Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about the wake scene, for instance, in the film.
Yeah.
This long scene in which death does bring us together with certain obligations to someone who is not there.
Mhm.
Right? It's for me a super interesting moment of human conviviality, because it's precisely the moment when, in a way, you're released from your obligation to that person, that we all feel, in fact, an extraordinary sense of duty or obligation. So I'm just curious.
Mm. I mean, as you were speaking, I was thinking about how I became familiar with Maggie's writing through The Art of Cruelty, and how it came right at the right time for me, in the sense that I was working on that aspect of the scene, starting to think about ways of combining the real with an artificiality, and how your book questions what happens when reality television and internet porn and all the kinds of depictions of violence and cruelty that we can see so easily are put next to a Haneke film or something. It's like, what does it mean to some of us that use extreme imagery? So it did kind of filter down into questions I was asking about, like where the boundaries would be between the real aspects of the project and the more artificial aspects of the project, because it's certainly what I wanted to happen in that piece. I wanted to change the ratio that I was working with the Cremaster cycle, for example, which really leaned toward the artificial, and to try to find a different relationship to naturalism and to chance and to failure and to.
Your
Failure.
sense of ethics or failure? Yeah.
Failure.
I mean, in the face of all this.
I mean, every
Of these
single-
epic
yeah,
works.
every single. I mean, I'm dealing with things that are incredibly fragile. You have that was fragile in the making, and now you have these things. And, you were fragile while you're writing it, and now you have this thing. And I deal with things that only fall apart. Yeah, basically. And I think that this, how can you say, coming to terms with failure as that being an absolutely essential part of the practice and how it adds value, actually. If you could deal with that, that would be the one of the, I don't know if you call them really rules, one of the foundations of reality is that if you want to make something succeed, you'll have to accept failure. It's, or it's what part of it fails. Yeah. So.
And then what room you give the failure in the completed, because it seems to me there's failure in process, right? Chance and things that don't work,
Saturated.
and things that you're editing out because they don't work, because they actually fail in a kind of dumb way,
Right.
They don't work. And
Right.
then there's this other kind of failure that worms its way into what are in fact very successful and complete and well-functioning works of art. River of Fundament, The Loss of Small Detail, Argonauts, right? Like these big things that you've all done. I mean, can you parse the difference between, that kind of failure that happens that we don't, the failure we don't see, right? Because you have edited it out, and the trace of failure that still is the contour of the project.
I inserted myself into the work invisibly, so it got to the point now where I direct the work live, so no one knows how the work is going. I listen to the audience, figure out so you accept them as there, and not sort of erase them and only look at the show, and then in dialogue with the people you're working with, you change the dynamic of the performance as it's progressing. So, in ears or some other, like some kind of cue, some kind of thing to send messages, and then actually react to the situation. Don't be in denial about it, or don't hope it's going to go better. Actually just take action, and then get everyone on the same page about that, going, okay, I'll try to protect you from, for example, you had a late night out and you don't have the strength to get through this next scene, okay? And I see that, and I'm assuming that you would rather get through with the strength you have, and I would cut the scene short versus watching you, reach the edge and then slowly tumble off. So it's about, in our case, trusting each other, in that respect. So I'm dealing with a very volatile thing. Like that, so it does fail all the time. I'm actually, it's a bit like automatic pilot. You're flying from LA to Honolulu. The plane is 98% of the time off course. You just correct. So you get there. Yeah.
I don't really want to think about that at all. Matthew, do you think about? I mean, can you talk about failure and what role it might have in your work?
Sure. With this project, there were scenes which, were designed around something I knew wouldn't work, basically, or it wouldn't work in a way that anybody could predict. And an example of that would be the scene where the automobile is shredded inside the showroom, which was in Santa Fe Springs here. That was one of the first scenes that we staged, and it was staged live, and it couldn't, it was a specific automobile. It couldn't be rehearsed in that sense. We took a compact car out in a field with that same machine, and I knew that it would pulverize the car, but I had no idea how it would work in this showroom. And we couldn't rehearse it in the showroom because it was going to destroy the showroom. So, so really, the whole drama of that performance was designed around this scene that you couldn't rehearse, and I was super excited about it. And but I think it was one of the conditions for this project. It was to try to rewire my relationship to editing, removing failure, because certainly it exists in other things that I've done. It just gets cut and reworked, and so to perform these live made a kind of it created a kind of governor for that it would have to exist, and it would have to be the center of the work.
What would have constituted what would have constituted failure in that situation?
Well, I mean, there was so little tolerance for the machine, with the ceiling. The fire marshal didn't want us to turn the sprinkler system off, so the excavator operator couldn't hit any of the pipes. He had like no room to operate that thing. Somebody could have been injured. We would have had to stop. I mean, a lot of things. I mean, it could have been lame. and not,
That's the worst.
right? Not scary at all.
It's very not lame for those of you who've seen it. Not lame. Awesome.
But yeah, I mean, that was sort of
Is there a
that
real-
was one of the starting points of this whole project.
There were real concerns, so there wasn't more of a dramaturgical. Yeah, the lame part is
Right.
dramaturgical, but in essence, you had to produce the dramaturgy out of these real constraints. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
including what would the people do? Like,
Right.
how would the people behave? You know?
Were there people?
What
in-
would it
there were-
take
There
to-
weren't people in the room there, were there?
Well, there were, and we had to clean them out. We had to clear them out of the
people?
room. The people.
Oh, to clean them out. I was you got rid of that scene.
Well, not really. There is metaphor after all.
Yeah. But
Comes the blushing, right?
I had to go there too.
But I mean, were there people in like within striking distance of one of those metal bits or something?
Well, they were first in the room, and then they were removed from the room. And as they wrapped around the outside of the building and looked in through the glass had a layer of Lexan for most of it. But for example, one of the glass panels did shatter. I mean, luckily it was off to the side and nobody was injured, but it was, it was a risk. It was a huge risk. But in terms of your question, it was the greater risk, had to do with, I think, banking on it being extremely dramatic.
What about the smelter story?
Same deal, same thing. I mean,
Tell him you'll only tell us the smelter story if he dances.
yeah, similarly in Detroit, in the middle of a day-long performance, there was I would say the center of that performance was staged around this kind of homemade smelter, like a furnace system that melted 50 tons of iron, and to melt that much iron, you have to start in the morning. You have to, and we knew there was rain. There's a chance of rain, so we decided that morning just to go for it, knowing that if the rain would come, we may have to evacuate the audience, because you can't really pour molten metal into a moist form, a moist mold, and so. Yeah, basically well, I mean, that's what ended up making these pieces, that when hot metal is poured into water, the water expands to steam and it blows the metal apart. So the concern in Detroit would be that the metal would be thrown back at the audience. And so the rain came, and the rain got worse and worse, and so they started the evacuation. And it was clumsy. It was, steps were wet. It was muddy. They were trying to get people out of there. At the same time, one of those furnaces cracked in the back and started leaking back under the scaffolding where all the workers were standing. So they opened it because they had to. And
Did at any point did people think that was being staged? You know what I mean? Because people would think, oh, it's all part of the performance, as if it was dangerous. And the
I mean,
cynics
I think they were
going,
freezing,
yeah.
and they
They
were
were
like-
perfectly happy to leave.
Exactly. Well, they were perfectly happy to have hot metal
Oh.
suddenly warm up the seating area. But I mean, from a performance standpoint, it was probably a huge failure. But I think on film we managed to capture some really strong footage.
What were you going for that would have made it a success?
Well, I mean, I was able to watch all 5 of those furnaces empty the metal into the chambers and watch it move from the upper reservoir down into the lower one and see the whole intention of it. And it was beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
They didn't get to see that.
Okay.
So
Did it explode at all, like you were worried?
there was a little bit of that, but not. It wasn't as. And it was one of the things that made me curious about this. If we could get away with that, then could I, for example, set up one of those furnaces next to a river and dump 5 tons into the river, and what would the metal do there?
Yeah.
If it had all of that pressure behind it, and it eventually evolved into a more controlled way of working, but yeah, I mean, these failures always lead to something. Yeah.
I want to pick up on that phrase, if we can get away with that, then. It's one of the great if-then clauses. If we can get away with that, then. And I wonder if that might be a way of the 3 of you, because it seems to me all 3 of you have a little bit of, well, if we could get away with that, then what's to stop us from moving on to these other zones, other forms of language, other forms of bodies. Is that a way to maybe open up a little bit the distinction in each of your works between, and I'm trying to get back to something Maggie was talking about earlier, maybe between the difference between transgression and subversion, which it seems to me in some way all 3 of your works traffic in. And Matthew, this project in particular really seems to push at the terms transgression and subversion, but they're different to me, and I wonder if you might want to parse them a little bit, how they feel different to you in each of your work.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking about a lot of the things I've heard Matthew say about River of Fundament and about the kind of initial mission of the thing as being a kind of opportunity to disrespect and or respect Norman Mailer's project and the way, and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how, we were talking about this book I wrote, The Art of Cruelty, about how I dedicated it to one of my elder teachers, Annie Dillard, because she always told me, be really careful what you put in your mind as spectacle or as art or as literature, because whatever you put in, that's what you're going to put out. So don't put crap in, because then you'll make, not crap, like don't put bad stuff in. She actually meant more ethically, like don't put, she kind of meant like don't put, I don't know, just
Like bad art in your mind?
no, like bad, like kind of, she was kind of in a kind of Christian sense, like bad, you know what I mean? So that book is full of bad things. So I had to dedicate it to her because it was kind of an act of homage. Like look at all this bad stuff, Annie, I put in that you told me not to put in, and then here it comes all back out, But the point of the respect was that is that she was correct in that if you, depending on what avenues you do investigate over decades or years, those are going to be the things that you're thinking about, and if you're an artist or you're a thinker or whatever, they're going to need, if you're a producer, they're going to need to come back out in some kind of digested form. So I think so she was right. She just might have chosen different content for me, but the methodology of the way things work is seemingly correct. But now I'm far away. Helen, you were talking about transgression. So I guess I was just thinking about I was really interested in the inception of, obviously it relates to broader issues about anxiety of influence or anxiety of authorship and the roles of precursors, balance chain, you name it, like the role in which, because I think that there's a kind of sense, at least in like feminist history, that that you're not in the club, so you're not really like that the forms of disrespect or disobedience you're taking aren't playing on the same field, because no one's going like, oh, like no one's recounting literary history, usually with, whether or not like Marguerite Duras, changed the river of direction, it's just that's not what's happening, So I think that I'm interested in qualities of disobedience or disrespect, and I'm interested in, but I also very much relate to that kind of wager, like about how to pay respect to something while also completely, subverting its mission, and I see a lot of that going on in both of your guys' work, and I think that I have always foregrounded the people who I've learned from in my own work in a way that I have, I feel like that both of these guys have in certain ways too, because I am interested in, I'm not as interested in the notion of, the self-made man or woman as I am interested in dramatizing those conflicts about what you've internalized and what you're going to send back out, which is different from being interested in like literary art history. I'm not really very interested in literary art history. I'm interested in more the kind of, as I just described with Annie Dillard, like a different kind of, or with Mailer and River of Fundament, a more kind of fraught psychological, psychosexual, whatever it is, conflict with the progenitor of the work,
Transgression, subversiveness.
I always feel it's in. I never feel like I'm transgressing or subverting. I think it's more in the observer than myself. I'm within and working on something. It's a body, and I think that there has been a long tradition of putting up borders of what is the appropriate thing for a body to do within a certain class of actions, and I never felt like I belonged to one club. So I started out wanting to be Fred Astaire when I was a child, and then from the movies, you were talking about the movies' influence? Yeah, there you go. And then later I was a club dancer. One point I became a stripper. Then I learned ballet. Ended up teaching hip hop in Brazil at one point. So it's just like, it's all one flow. It's still the same body. It's not like I suddenly turned into someone else. And so I was trying to practice through my body, how it talks, what it says, what it knows. And so all that, what do we call it, talk around whatever we were doing was about maybe transgression or subversion, but I thought it was trying to figure out how my body knows things, or what can be known with the body, through the body.
Right.
I mean, I guess I talked about it a little bit before, but I think I look for opportunities to make to use extreme imagery or extreme physicality in a more to treat it more like chemistry, I would say, and to or whether it's about placing images side by side, or marbleizing two things that really don't belong together. I think I think it's about trying to naturalize something that we can agree is explicit or extreme, and I think there are a number of different ways to do that, and I think I try to do it in a number of different ways. So, and that sounds to me more like, what are the two words again? Transgression. Yeah, I mean, it sounds, I think that the transformative quality of that is sort of more to do with transgression, I think. Yeah. So subversion, I think I'm interested in subversive things, and Art of Cruelty made me really self-conscious of that in a way.
Right.
I mean, yeah, but yeah. I think that when I'm working, I don't relate so much to that word.
Right. Right.
I think
Doesn't
it's
seem
more.
like subversive. I don't know. Eve Sedgwick, the great queer theorist, she always would she kind of had this great phrase where she would critique things, and people would say, like, everyone would say everything was like kind of hegemonic, kind of subversive, like kind of does a little of both, like she was just saying kind of hegemonic, kind of subversive. It's just not really enough, I think that that's the. I don't think that. I think subversion. I think the reason why terms about alchemy or chemistry or these things are really interesting is that, trying to make, no one tries to make kind of hegemonic work, but if you're trying to make it deeply or even kind of subversive, I just don't know all the time whether or not people are always like, we're trying to subvert heteronorms by writing this, queer the family. I'm like, no, like you're right. Like it's
Right.
just not a. I just don't think for people when you might have things floating around in your head, but I think when you're we were talking about, the nuts and bolts kind of formal approaches you take to things, it's like subversion is like an outcome. It can be an outcome, or like you're saying
Right.
about audiences, it depends on who you're talking to, and then things are, back at you. But I just wanted to say one thing quickly, even though I'm all over the map, about failure, just because we moved off from it before. But I just, it's really interesting to me to hear you, Matthew, talk about failure with the work, because, when I watch both of your works, I think that they're, that there's a feeling that they're not allowing for any failure on a micro level, in terms of like each thing that might be in the frame has been decided. We all know there's compromises, like that's good enough, but it feels perfect in this certain way. And I relate to that because I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, it's very unfashionable, but I feel like when I make books, I want them to be perfect. I don't want them to have failed sentences or failed thoughts in them. But I think that there's a greater sense, and this relates back to Mailer and the Ancient Evenings and about making things on epic scale, that like, should you attend to every image or micro level of the sentence, or get everything exactly right as you want it, even with admitting the failures that transpired, the whole thing may be judged by some a failure, and that's kind of like the beauty of that being out of your hands, because then you just say, to me, whatever it was, it became realized, perfect thing by perfect thing. Whether or not the whole thing fails is like a totally other question to realizing your vision, I guess.
I wouldn't want to live that life. The one where you had micromanaged everything that went out. No, but you have no idea how much is completely up to, yeah. Sort of one of our mottos is improv should look like choreography, and choreography should look like improv. So my goal was to defeat the standard conception that there's this great mind making this thing, and the craft is impeccable, and there is no question that it's coming from this one source, yeah, preferably male, right, yeah. So I was like, you have no idea who's making this work, how it's being made, how it's being generated. We're actually a collective that thinks very politically about our work together and what that means for whoever we come in contact with, either via the stage or privately, for that matter. So I guess if that's subversive, that is, on some level, that I maybe won't tell you what's actually happening, and you have to come to your own conclusions, coming from the point of what you think you want to see, what you want to believe about making and makers. I feel very strongly about that.
That might be a really perfect segue to open up to questions from the audience. We have a few more minutes in the program, and I'm curious if anyone, we've got like a kind of slightly Guantanamo situation with the lights, so you're a little hard to see, but I think we'll do our best if there are any questions or from the audience. Anyone feeling brave? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I have a question for actually Bill and Matthew. I want to go back to the point, Bill. You actually brought out the counterpoint, the ballet and the music term, and apply that. It's also mentioned applies to Matthew's work, and also Matthew mentioned that you, especially in the editing phase, you hold back, deliberately, and I'm wondering how do you consciously make the distinction between your work, artwork, from the conventional cinema, especially like, do you hold on to this conceptual idea and level consciously holding back something so it is more important for the artist to achieve it instead of kind of integrating a little bit into the conventional cinema? How do you make that decision? Does this question even make sense?
Well, I think it's probably important to say that I wasn't really trained as a filmmaker. I started using the video camera to document activities in the studio, actions that I wanted to, where I wanted to connect one object to another, endurance events, things like this, things that related to object making, in my opinion. And through that use of the camera, I think I slowly got more interested in storytelling, and I guess dividing my body into multiple bodies, and therefore asking friends to be those multiple bodies at first, and so it grew from there. And I think along the way, the storytelling, it developed and it grew, but it never, I guess it never stopped serving the object in some way. And it got a little more confusing during the Cremaster cycle, when occasionally it would start to resemble cinema. And I think I became more conscious of this withholding then, when I realized that it can't become the thing. It has to continue to function for me as an object making machine, basically. That there's a kind of this notion of this inverted pyramid that, you know, at the top of which sits this narrative, and at the bottom of which is this kind of funnel that you pull these objects out of. And I think it doesn't work when you have something fully determined, like a piece of cinema at the top of that. I think it doesn't have the same kind of potential, at least in my thinking.
It's like an alias. Yeah, what's the device called when you're doing one thing but you're actually trying to do another? You know, I'm not here, but I'm actually there. You know, whereas the narrative, what do you, avatar? You're using it as sort of saying, you think I'm here, but actually I am over here. You think I'm making this big narrative, but actually, as you just said, I'm trying to create this machinery to make these other things. Where it looks like it's one thing, but in fact, it's.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is intuitive, but I think that in certain cases, it's sort of easier to see, where you could say, okay, if this were a real film, this character would, you know, the arc would go like this, and that character would connect literally to that character.
This is a real film.
You know what I'm saying?
It's a real film. It's a machine for making a set of sculptures.
Yeah, so an object
Exactly.
sits in that arc somewhere, and that completes the emotional arc. And if it were completed in the film, it couldn't make the piece.
Yeah, but it's not like, for example, a plan. It's not like you could, if you recreated the film, you could make the objects again. It's not, you know, in that sense, like a blueprint or something.
Yeah, no, and it's a lot easier to talk about it in whatever you call it, hindsight or whatever. Like I'm a little more aware of it now, but I think when I've gone through whole periods where I was not aware of what I was doing in that sense, you know.
There's another question up there in the back, please.
Hi. Matthew, I have a question for the your pre-production process of your films, and especially the film River of Fundament, which is playing. which I just saw. At what point do you write a screenplay like a piece of cinema does, and you write, I want a person to come out of a cow and his finger is gonna stretch out from his anus, and at what point is do you meet with the composer, and who comes up with the ideas like we're gonna auto-tune this woman singing, things like that.
Right. Well, I mean, this particular piece was pretty heavily scripted. On the other hand, there are a lot of improvisers in this film, especially musical improvisers, but also, for example, all of those wake guests. None of that was written. You know, they were given topics and they were paired together to try to initiate something, but they were really allowed to just talk and talk about themselves or talk about their relationship to Mailer or whatever came. And
How much of that was real relationships and how much was artificial relationships?
it was sort of half and half. Yeah, it's half and half. But what was different about this piece was the relationship that Jonathan and I had through the writing. That we had talked about over the years. We had talked about making something that would function something like opera. We had done work before that was through composed, but part of it was composed conventionally after the scene was shot. He would approach the scene and he would score it, whatever. But this time, all of it was developed in tandem. So, and there are certain scenes that Jonathan choreographed. He wanted to place music in a particular spatial way through the scene, and so I kind of followed his lead, and in some cases, created characters that could occupy some of those spaces. But sometimes they're just musicians, and they became characters, and so there was a lot of that kind of collaborating. And I think it's one of the places where we really meet is that relationship to space. For him, it's about locating music spatially and not having it left, right, center. Like even in the way that the music is mixed. Finally, you have some instruments that are only in the rear speakers. It's a 7-1 mix. Mm-hmm. But I think if he had his way, it would be like 21 or whatever.
Thank you. I was wondering if both Bill and Matthew could speak about your thoughts on the importance of having a physical audience present for performance. Like as I was watching the video of the female footballers dragging the graphite block across the walls, I sort of had the sense that it was almost more powerful feeling this idea of them doing this performance without a physical audience present. But again, having people there live watching a performance is very important. So if you could just discuss.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a given. So I'm assuming I'll have an audience. Otherwise, it would just be rehearsal, I guess, or something. So, but I take the audience very, very seriously. They're an organ. Do you notice how you all laughed at the same rate, the same volume, et cetera, the tone? There wasn't any wah ha ha like that, right, they did it again, yeah? So in my case, I listen to this in performance. I also, I'm always directing from behind, and I'm always watching this. If I see heads start to move, I know it's time to change. If I don't hear them, then I see them. And so it's like your little vibrating sort of piece of coral, and it's a sea of heads, and I can pretty much tell how things are going. Sometimes boredom is a useful thing. You need to stretch out some tension and go twang like that, like a bow and arrow. But it's a great indicator. Your physicality, your visible physicality, is a great indicator of how you collectively are doing in relationship to what's being offered. You like that? I like that. Okay. You didn't know that, huh? We're back there watching you.
I mean, for me, I think I'm a little bit new to what you're speaking about. The scenes in ROF that were performed live, I hadn't tried that before, and it made me realize that I don't really consider my audience in that way at all, and at the same time, I'm really interested in that kind of behavior that you're talking about.
Did you, at any point, did you wish they were doing something different?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I was even insulted, I think. At, I had...
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, I mean, we set up, for example, in the performance in Los Angeles, we set up maybe 12 cameras. So I had a lot of coverage of not only what was happening, but also what the audience was doing. So back in the editing room, it was a little bit, picking out all these people that I knew, being like, I can't believe that person is on their phone. I can't believe it.
Right.
Yeah, but I've never, I guess I haven't, a lot of the performances, so-called performances I've made have just been for the camera. It's been a situation that I've set up and where either I or somebody else would perform something, and although it had all the problems of real-time action, it wasn't witnessed. So this was different, to bring, and that word witness I think was really important in the conception of it, that I felt like those objects, those transformations of objects that we talked about earlier, like the shredding of the car and the furnace scene, I wanted those to be witnessed. I didn't necessarily want to create a piece of theater. So I was in conflict, I think, through this whole piece about that, really. Really.
Yeah, in your case, you had an audience that wasn't confined like this, that they were allowed to move and sort of morph and correct and expand, et cetera, et cetera. In my case, they're bound more or less to their places. But in our case, in the case of theater, in the case of theater, you have to really ask the audience, well, what part of the performance aren't you? So you are absolutely, you can't separate the audience from the performance. That's what makes it a performance. It's the work, as Duchamp would say, it's the work that gets done. Otherwise, you don't have the work.
Since you're a grown-up, is there any more childlike stuff in your work?
Is there one person in one of the grown-ups on stage in particular you want to answer that question?
That was a prompt, Mom. Yeah. Actually, it goes up and down with me. Sometimes I have age restrictions. So some pieces people can't come in until they're 7 or until they're 14 or until they're 18. Yeah, because I do that because it's often there's the conception that all dance is accessible to all age groups, and because I don't really know what it is, it's not necessarily a dance, but it's not necessarily a play or a musical or an opera. And often I think, well, in the cases where there is content that might be hard for a child like yourself to understand, I think maybe it would be better if the seat was occupied by an adult. Yeah? So who would yeah, Adult Swim. Yeah, but I actually I have some pieces though that I think are good for kids. Yeah.
And Matthew, isn't your daughter in one of the scenes in the film? No, she's not. There's a beautiful child. I read the response.
Yeah, I was going to say that two of my favorite parts in River of Fundament. I told Matthew before was the playroom with the kids, and then also, you know, the beautiful. I was going to say aria, but that's just my layperson's term for what she sings, the young girl at the wake. Murder ballad. It's amazing. Yeah, I love those parts a lot. Anyway, all I would say to you is that I write a lot about, you know, I kind of vacillate or mix up writing critically and then writing about my life. And this might be kind of a scary thing to know, but everything that's happening to you now, like if you are, it really matters, you know, and I think I all the time think about tracing my obsessions back to when I was 6 or 8 or 10, or the things that I saw or took in and that happened to me. And so it all really matters, and you're already in the game of art, you know, so.
I mean, the way that I understood your question was more that it made me think of the way that there are certain scenes that I make in the films where a specialist, like somebody who does a particular job, and they're asked to come onto the film set and do that particular job that they do, so that there's really not much acting to do. There isn't a kind of they're not making choices like an actor would make, where they're pretending to be something. They're just doing it. So I'm really attracted to that. But I'm also then attracted to asking that person to step outside for a second of their specialty, and to like fall into the story. And there's something, I mean, I think there's something childlike in that, you know, that it's a little bit, it gives that person a chance to, you know, pretend, you know, rather than if that person was a professional actor, it would be a very different set of concerns, you know, a different set of choices that they would be making. So I really like working with non-actors and non-performers in perform situations. So it often feels, it often feels a little juvenile, or in a good way. Yeah.
How old are you?
8. We have time for one more question. So I'm gonna pick you, and then we're gonna.
Mine's kind of stupid. You might not want to end there. I was just over, I think I have a big loud mouth, don't I, kind of, but I was just over at the piece and with my grandson, who is 16, but he didn't want to come to the lecture. But he was fascinated by the marks on the wall. I know it's kind of stupid, but he was really, really interested in them and watched a little bit of film about how they were made and stuff. Could you talk about that a little bit, and maybe Bill and Maggie could too, of what in their work are kind of like the marks on the wall that maybe are there for us to see kind of in a way that we don't really usually get to see.
I mean, at the risk of sounding literal, I think it's several things for me. It's you know, there's a thread that runs through both the sculpture and the video, which is to do with a water line. You know, it's to do with you know, thinking about the way that the Nile River floods every year, and the sort of superstitions that the Egyptians had. They assigned it to the tears of Isis overflowing the river, like her grief would cause the river to overflow. Hurricane Sandy in New York, which hit just as we were filming on the river. So the sort of flood and water line notion kind of runs through, like it runs deep through the project. So I wanted for there to be a water line around the exhibition, or through the exhibition. And I decided to do that through this vehicle of drawing restraint, which I often do, where I set up a task for the making of a mark. And in this case, it was to invite members of the LA Temptations, LFL football team, and ask them to drag this block through the space. And 6 of them were pulling the block, and 2 of them were guiding the graphite against the wall. So they were, collaborating on this drawing. They were given very little. They were given some choices. One would be to keep the block perpendicular to the wall and make a thin line. The other would be to let it veer off and to make a thicker line or a lower line using one of the other points on the block. So, yeah.
Was the block designed to make those specifically have those options?
Well, it's a pentagon, a funneling pentagon volume. So it has many points, and but it was designed with a certain angle so that it could touch the wall. A point can touch the wall without the rest of the block touching. Yep.
Traces, watermarks.
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I'm thinking hard. I think that, okay.
You want to think hard out loud?
Okay, I don't know if this is pretty long, but whatever. Here we are to think so aloud. So I don't know, I guess I was just thinking about the way that, for me, one thing and I actually talk about this in my book Bluettes, is I'm very interested in how, I guess this probably happens with film editing in some ways, but in writing, the material of the substance always remains the same as words. There's no real seismograph on the thing. So in a way, you're always manipulating it as a water level that you can always really even out. Like the whole book, you can rough it down to all the same tone. You can kind of modulate, but it's like there's no. I can't quite explain it, but there's no. The language flows in and of itself. Like that's what language does, I guess, as a material. So I guess I'm just thinking about this notion of the water line and how I feel like language is a water line, but I feel like within that, if you don't want it to be monotonous in some way, you have to figure out how to introduce texture or seismography or something to it. But it's a very, very different thing than working with something that, I'm so jealous. That's why I'm like in the art conversation, is that I'm so jealous of the possibilities with materials to make those things happen. So in a way, in terms of like drawing restraint, writing to me feels like, it's just everything is restrained because all you have are the words, and you can't make them a color, and you can't put them on the wall. You can, but not in the way I'm talking about, So I think it's, but if you want it, like in Matthew's films, like I'm always looking at like, the quality of that, or the sculpture is like of like the the gold plating or something, and going like, how do you make a like how could you make something in language have a shine? How do you make something feel ugly? How do you make it's just this very different problem. But I feel like through visuality, I learn. I don't learn how to do it, but I learn new problems to try and speak to.
I want to thank you all for being such a good audience. I want to just remind you that you can see the River of Fundament film in its entirety on Thursdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And please go to our brand new website, which has all kinds of other programs like this. Thank you for coming. Have a great day.